On behalf of the Encounter, welcome everybody, welcome back. I'm John McCarthy, I teach philosophy at Catholic University, and I will be moderating or attempting to moderate this event. Before starting, I would like to thank Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas for sponsoring this conversation. I can't tell you how happy, how honored I am to be here with these two people. If you look this up in the Constitution, you will be reminded that we eliminated hereditary titles. So that's why the Cowardly Lion couldn't be a king, he couldn't be a prince or a duke or an earl. We didn't eliminate titles, and these are two people with esteemed titles, deservedly so. Mary Ann Glendon is professor of law emerita at Harvard University and former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. Her government service includes chairing the U.S. State Department Commission on Unalienable Rights and membership on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. She served at the Holy See in a variety of capacities, including as president of the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences. I don't know what title she got for that, and as member of the Board of Supervisors of the Institute of Religious Works. Her several books include In the Courts of the Three Popes, An American Lawyer and Diplomat in the Last Absolute Monarchy in the West, there's a title for you, and The Forum and the Tower, a series of biographical essays exploring the relation between political philosophy and politics in action. Meir Soloveichik is entitled rabbi, and is he ever entitled? So we're counting 250 years and counting. His family has been a rabbinical family for almost 250 years. If there were rabbinical aristocracy, this would be royal family rabbis. So he's also rabbi then of the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States and director of the Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought at Yeshiva University. He was recently appointed by the President of the United States to the Presidential Commission on Religious Liberty and served as vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. His podcasts and lectures are available for Tikva, and they can be found on meirsoloveichik.com. I want to just recommend two. He's got a tremendous essay on that website on kashrut, on keeping kosher, and you'll all profit from reading it. And then there's a beautiful exchange with the director of one of the great films of the last 2 decades or so called Fill the Void. And I urge you all to read both those things. So let's turn then to our esteemed guest. This year on July 4th, these United States of America will mark the sesquicentennial anniversary. That's 250 years, a quarter of a millennium, since what were at the time 13 colonies publicly and jointly declared their independence from England. And that through a memorable declaration. How ought we to be celebrating this anniversary? Any number of towns, cities, counties, vacation resorts throughout the land have certainly budgeted extra for more fireworks on this year's 4th. But an anniversary need not be just an excuse to have a party. Certain anniversaries also are an occasion for reflection, for looking back, perhaps in bitterness or sorrow, but also often enough with gratitude, even if our gratitude is tempered by criticisms or questions about the event we're commemorating. So too, anniversaries afford us an opportunity which we can pass up or profit from to take stock of our present situation, as they also provoke us to look forward, always with a measure of uncertainty, but also perhaps in hope and with a renewed sense of purpose. So for the two of you, Is America's sesquicentennial a truly significant anniversary? Does it count for anything in the larger scheme of things? Or is it merely a pretext for a little extra oomph in the skies a few months from now? What, if anything, does the anniversary mean to you? What, in your judgment, should it mean to us? So, Professor Glendon, if you would begin.
Well, I think this particular moment of rather exceptional political divisiveness, I think it's a really good time to think back on the fact that our form of government, our liberal democracy, was an experiment. And it was a daring experiment because political theory, the classical political theory known to the founders, said it is impossible to have a republic in an extended territory with a large and diverse population. So they knew, and as they explain in Federalist Number 1, they knew they were bringing something new into the world. And that was not uncontroversial. There were many people, many Americans at the time, and not just the anti-federalists, who thought that, all right, maybe you could have a republic in a somewhat extended territory, but we're a country of 3 million. The ideal size of a polis was 5,000. So tremendous skepticism. And I think that it's important and maybe a little disquieting to remember that the framers also said at that time that the experiment would require more civic virtue in citizens and statespersons than any other form of government. So I think at this moment, it's a good time to remind ourselves of what Ben Franklin said to the lady who asked him, as he was leaving the Constitutional Convention, she said, "Well, Mr. Franklin, what have we got?" And he said, "Well, madam, we've got a republic, if you can keep it." So I think it's a moment to remind ourselves that that remark is as pertinent for us as it was then, and a good time to reflect on our responsibility, what we can do to preserve and improve the experiment.
Thank you.
First, I want to say what a joy and an honor it is to be back with Mary Ann, with whom I had the great privilege of working on the Commission on Inalienable Human Rights at the State Department. And I'm forever grateful to have Mary Ann really, not just as a colleague, but really as a leader of the endeavor in which we were engaged. It's a joy to be back here with you and to be here with you in Manhattan. It's great to see you. Everything Mary Ann said is, of course, absolutely correct. We are marking the 250th anniversary of an experiment. We think of ourselves as a young country, but we are marking 250 years of the longest continuous democratic republic in the history of the world. But I think it's also important to think about what makes this democratic republic unique. There are now other democracies on earth. What sets America apart? And here, as we've seen with Tocqueville, we as Americans can often understand ourselves better when we see ourselves through the eyes of an insightful outsider. And so maybe I'll just share with the audience something that I heard, and he's written this as well, something about America that I've heard from a very much missed friend of mine, the late Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Sacks describes how, when he was the age of many of the students here, college student, he first came to America. And he visited Washington, D.C. And he was struck by the memorials in Washington, D.C. Now, why was he struck by that? If you've been to London, you know they have plenty of memorials. It's not, you don't need to come to Washington to see memorials. But what he saw in Washington was that at each memorial, it featured not only images, statues, but also etched into the stone, words. So Thomas Jefferson's statue is at the Jefferson Memorial, but also Declaration of Independence, Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. You have the enthroned Lincoln in the temple of David Chester French, but you'll also have Second Inaugural, Gettysburg Address. Rabbi Sacks reflected that London has nothing like this. If you go to the memorials in London, if you go to the memorial for David Lloyd George, you'll see etched into stone 3 words: David, Lloyd, and George. You'll see. Churchill's statue has 1 word: Churchill.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of Winston Churchill, but words were kind of important for him. All right? You all know some of his things, right? We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight in the hills. I actually know of a comedian who said, when I heard Churchill's speech, we shall fight in the beaches, we shall fight in the forest, we shall fight in the hills, I thought to myself, it sounds like he's describing my family vacation. But, right? So, and if you've traveled, when Rabbi Sachs mentioned this to me, if you travel, you'll see, I began to notice this everywhere. If you go to Washington, D.C., go to a souvenir shop, you will buy souvenirs with words, You will find a tie with a declaration on it. You will find a mug with the Bill of Rights on it.
Yeah.
If you go out of Heathrow, I do that a lot, no one's selling a mug with the Magna Carta on it. They're selling images, Buckingham Palace, the King, the Queen. Somebody once gave me a mug from the Kensington Palace gift shop with images of Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And when you pour hot coffee into the mug, the 6 wives disappear. So why the difference? So the difference is, Rabbi Sachs said, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, England at least was a class or tradition-based society. So therefore, those who belonged know. Those who didn't know showed that they didn't belong. Whereas America, this is Rabbi Sachs, is that rarest of instances of a covenantal society, inspired by covenantal politics, or as the word for it in the Hebrew Bible is brit. A covenant, as Rabbi Sachs explained, drawing on others, is one in which parties come together bound to each other and to God around an idea, a creed, a set of ideas around which they bind themselves and that they commit to perpetuating to future generations. Declaration of Independence is the anniversary that we're marking. John Adams, my favorite founder, I identify with him, bald, always convinced he didn't get enough credit. That speaks to me. But John Adams thought, as a matter of international law, America became independent on July 2nd when they voted for the Lee Resolution declaring these colonies free and independent states. But we mark July 4th because that's when the American covenant came into being. It has a great idea, all men are created equal. And there's covenantal language in support of this declaration with a firm reliance on divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It's the anniversary of America's covenant. Therefore, it falls to us to mark and reflect upon on 250th anniversary our covenantal identity.
You've really taken us to what I want to ask is the next question. So expanding upon this, but we'll begin with Mary Ann here. The nation was born in deeds, above all the great deed that was the Revolutionary War, which involved an expenditure of life on both sides, but also in words, as you pointed out, great words. It's astonishing to me that we were able to produce such a lucid and short constitution. I don't think lawyers now could ever succeed in writing a constitution that wasn't 3,000 pages long, you know. So these words and deeds, they point to ideals, as you say. If this anniversary means anything to us, it's because those ideals are still meaningful. So what are the founding ideals of this nation, Mary Ann, in your judgment, that we should be recalling to mind?
I think a key point to keep in mind about the ideals is that they were a great variety. And they were drawn from many different sources: Greek, Roman, Judeo-Christian, early modern political philosophy. And that meant that as they were integrated woven into our political tradition, those ideals Ideals like individual freedom, human equality, rule of law, inalienable rights, those ideals both reinforced each other, but sometimes pulled against each other. I think that's important to keep in mind because those tensions, reinforcing but pulling against freedom and equality, for example, that made it inevitable that there would be debates and differences about how they would be interpreted and what would be emphasized over the ages. And so one way to look at those debates, I think the best way to look at those debates, the ideal way to look at them, is that's a sign of a vigorous and healthy democracy, that continuing discussion of the point and purpose, the meaning of the ideals, a sign of what Alistair MacIntyre called a living tradition, a part of who we are as a people, and a part of what has enabled us as a people, over time becoming ever more diverse, to keep discussing that set of ideals and keep them in the right balance and tension with one another. So I think the question for us today is really, what is the status of that debate? That debate works as long as there is some kind of common commitment, and a certain commitment not only to the ideals, but to a certain mode of discourse, a certain mode of civic engagement. And I think it's not going too far to say that we have reached a question that you political scientists who are here will recognize as the question of whether we are a nation in the sense of a people bound together by certain beliefs and commitments, or whether we are a mere state, a geographical entity with a line drawn around it and a common government. And it's up to us, really, and I think especially those of us who are associated with universities, and not just universities, but elementary schools, high schools, to keep the necessity of that common commitment in mind, and to teach at the very beginning. Sometimes we teach it in the family when we're not fighting, is how to have a civilized discussion. I think that's really a greater responsibility and challenge for us now than it has been for quite a while.
I think it's a wonderful point that Mary Ann makes, that the fact that it's a way of actually looking positively about our debates. The fact is we are still debating the implications of the American creed. And that does set us apart from many, many other countries. And there are, indeed, as Mary Ann said, several different ideas with different origins, diverse origins, at the heart of the American creed. But if we have to pick one, I do enjoy rankings, ranking movies, ranking books, things like that. If we do have to choose one, so our guide, I think, is the great political theologian of America, which is Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln spoke of the Constitution as the frame, famously, around the Declaration of Independence. And for Lincoln, the core of the Declaration is America's covenantal creed. That's what makes it a covenantal people. Lincoln spoke about this several different times before he became president, when he was clearly thinking about this. There's a remarkable speech that he gave on his way to the inauguration. He stopped in Trenton, New Jersey, and he was super excited to be there. Probably the only person in human history to be excited to be in Trenton, New Jersey. Is there anybody from New Jersey here? Raise your hand. I think as I once heard it, if you want to know why we in New York are depressed, it's because for us the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. But he was excited. Why was he excited? He was excited because As a young man, he had read Parson Weems' biography of Washington. And he had read about the miraculous crossing of the Delaware. And he said, I remember then thinking, boy, even as I was, how what those men fought for was more than independence alone, but that which holds out a blessing for the world for all time to come. And Lincoln said, that's what makes America, and these were his words, an almost chosen people. Almost chosen people. What does that mean, an almost chosen people? On the one hand, to reference the phrase chosen people is, of course, to speak about America as a covenantal people. But to say almost chosen is to say, and this is building on what Mary Ann said, a republic if we can keep it, that the exceptional nature of America is not guaranteed. It's up to us to ensure that its exceptional nature is preserved.
Yeah.
But for Lincoln, that great blessing was first and foremost the Declaration. So the other great speech before his presidency about this is the speech that Lincoln gave on July 4th, 1858. And he's speaking about the fact that around half of America at that time does not descend from those that fought in the Revolution. And he says about them, he says, we have here many of those that are from Germany and Scandinavia, something like that. And when they look back to those that fought the Revolution to find blood that links them, they will find that they have none. But when they look to that old Declaration of Independence and its words that all men are created equal, and they find that they feel that connection to those men that wrote that, as if they were blood of the blood, he says, then so they are. This is the electric cord, that's Lincoln's words, that will link all liberty-loving people. And so to be a covenantal people is to have a covenant that joins generations. And for Lincoln, those are the words that are at the heart of the American covenant. That human beings are created equal and endowed by their Creator in equality. In equality, space, in that equality, with certain inalienable rights. That's the heart of the Declaration. And that, I think, is at the heart of the American covenant.
Falls to me to object now. So 2 objections.
How dare you, sir? Yeah. Yeah.
Let's take this outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's cold out there. Let's do it inside.
Okay. I'll have my people talk to your people.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's no denying that what determined the shape of our country, not only at its beginning and its origin, but also now, so still determining our shape, is the ugliest of ugly truths about our nation, the reality of chattel slavery. So the people now who take no stock of 1776 as the year that's really we should be looking back to. Secondly, you mentioned Ben Franklin. Franklin was one of the great debunkers of our nation, who poo-pooed the Bible, the book. For him, as for, I dare say, a fair few, there really wasn't any great piety at work in their thinking. Or at least many people argue so. So how do we respond to these objections to your argument for our holding dear our nation?
It's interesting that the poo-pooing of American ideals has, in recent times, come back, and not just about the phenomenon. I guess I'm going to have to disagree with your question.
Well, that's one way of fighting.
I don't think we can say that one single phenomenon, even a phenomenon as important as slavery, I don't think we can say one single phenomenon shaped the country. But there are people, a large number of people, who think it was such an important factor in shaping the country that it casts question on our ideals. And I think that's a very dangerous path to go down. And I think it's good to remember that someone like Frederick Douglass, who once held that view, he changed his mind, and he came to view those ideals as what made the Constitution, in his words, a glorious liberty document in spite of its compromise with slavery. And that's why Abraham Lincoln took the commitment to human equality as a sign that our founders, with that very same ideal, had, quote, put slavery on a course of extinction. And that's why Martin Luther King in Birmingham jail said that promise, that covenant involving human equality, was a promissory note given to the founders, by the founders. So I would say that we go down the wrong path when we trash those ideals. And it's disturbing to me to see a certain body of thought emerging in the United States today, sometimes called post-liberal, but I have read people describing themselves as post-liberal, saying that our founding ideas have become obsolete and unworkable. And that causes their thoughts to turn to an alternative form of regime, more centralized. And I just think we have to resist that, both of those trends, trashing the ideals, with all our might and main, because, as the rabbi was saying, what other country, for 250 years, we have had, with all the faults and imperfections, we have had a regime that has delivered more freedom, more equality, more opportunity, more human flourishing than any other regime. Not a good idea to start thinking about replacing it.
To speak of a nation as a covenantal nation is not to say, of course, that it doesn't violate its covenants. I mean, if you've read the Bible, spoiler alert, covenants get violated, sometimes pretty soon after they're created. Biblical Israel worships the golden calf 40 days after the covenant. Not my people, I'm a Levite, we didn't do that. Does that make me better than everyone else? Probably. But covenants get violated. And of course, at the heart of Lincoln's thought is grappling with the fact that America begins with this great universal creed and is violating that creed at the very same moment. And the very story of Abraham Lincoln indicates that part of what makes exceptional the story of American history is not that it always fulfilled everything that its covenantal creed demands, but at its greatest moments, it sought to better live up to that covenantal calling. There is no speech on earth in the modern period that is like the second inaugural. The great Catholic historian Paul Johnson, in an essay in First Things called Almost Chosen People, said that if you read the second inaugural, you cannot imagine any of Lincoln's contemporaries, Louis Napoleon Garibaldi, Palmerston, giving that speech. Lincoln is about to win the Civil War. But he doesn't get up there and say, we won, USA, USA. He gets up there and says, we all, North and South, have to ask, why has this happened to us? And he says, God is bringing this upon us for a reason. And he is obligating us to renew our loyalty to the implications of our covenantal calling of equality, and to do so with malice toward none, with charity for all. Can you point to a single other speech like this in the 19th century?
Yeah.
Anywhere? And of course, in so doing, Lincoln looks, to come back to the other part of your question, to the Bible. Citing Psalms, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Says that right before he says, with malice toward none, with charity for all. And he, by the way, he doesn't even say in the Psalms. He just says, as was said thousands of years, because everyone knew in the audience what that was. He didn't need to explain it. He didn't need to explain it. Were there those in early American history that were skeptical about some of the claims of Scripture? Sure, though I think it is overstated. But even those that were knew that it was this imagery that spoke to the American people itself. Benjamin Franklin's suggestion, separate question what his own beliefs were, we can have that debate another time. But Benjamin Franklin's suggestion for the seal of the United States in a commission that was formed on July 4th, 1776. This was Franklin's suggestion, and it was that suggestion that was voted on, among other images, by a commission made up of Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams. And the suggestion was an image of Moses and Pharaoh at the splitting of the sea with the motto, rebellion to tyrants, obedience to God. And if many of the founders, not Jefferson, but many of the founders were horrified by the French Revolution, it was because for them, as Rabbi Sachs put it, when society loses the notion that our rights are ultimately rooted in the Creator, society loses its best defense of those rights. That's why John Adams foresaw what would happen in the French Revolution. And so the Bible plays a huge role in the American founding. If there is one person who had played a role in the founding that truly was hostile to Scripture, it was Thomas Paine. But even Thomas Paine, when he wrote Common Sense, essentially gave an argument that was largely from the book of Samuel, because he knew the audience to whom he spoke. And so we need to recognize how, for the American people, the Bible, and the Hebrew Bible especially here because it was so political, because it was about a particular covenantal people, played such a huge role in the American imagination. And we therefore need to ask ourselves that if we're no longer in a time where a president could just cite the Psalms, where are we? There was an episode, I'll end with this, there was an episode of Jeopardy in 2023. Now, to be on Jeopardy, you have to know something. And the clue was, in Double Jeopardy, the topic was walking and talking, and the clue was something like, this Bible book gives us the phrase, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. All three contestants just stared blankly, and were not able to name it till the buzzer sounded. All three of these people. And the question becomes, when we've even lost the knowledge of what it means to speak about a covenant, how do we preserve a covenantal people? And the answer is it falls first and foremost, I think, to those that still do understand how the Bible, among other texts, impact the American founding, to educate and to communicate the American covenant to the next generation.
This tees me up for the next question beautifully. In 1776, we were 13 colonies, 140,000 square miles, 3 million people maybe, I don't know, the population of Brooklyn. The country is now 20 times that size in mass, not counting its territories in the Caribbean and Pacific Oceans. We have those. Maybe we'll have Canada and Greenland later, I don't know. We're now 340 million, and not only are there a lot more of us, we're way more diverse, linguistically, religiously, and culturally. Way more than ever before, than anywhere has seen anywhere in history. Again, New Yorkers like to think of themselves as the center of the universe. New Yorkers like to think of United States as really New York. On the other hand, I've been told there are native speakers of over 800 different languages in New York. So set aside disputes about founding ideals and our failure sometimes to measure up to them. Given how very different we are now from what we were then, is it realistic to talk about America's founding ideals? Are they adequate to our present situation? If we've got to be apologists, we dwindling number of Jews and Christians, here we have the upper hand, but even so, we've got nothing to boast about. Do we still have the power to bring ourselves into a more perfect union? Mary Ann.
Well, anybody who could answer that question should get a Nobel Prize, but I'll have a go at it. I would say the question about the ideals, it's not about the adequacy of the ideals for a huge population. It should be about the adequacy of the political institutions that are required to make those ideals effective and a reality, and, as Tocqueville taught, even more important than the political mechanisms is what he called the mores, what we call the culture, what you might call the seedbeds of civic virtue. What is the health of the political institutions that we need to make this experiment work for 50 million? And what is the health of the social institutions, what Catholics call the mediating institutions of civil society, that are the seedbeds of the habits and attitudes and character and competence that you need to make those ideals real? And that's why, as we've been saying in different contexts, that's why this experiment imposes on all of us a tremendous responsibility to keep it going. And if we take a look around at our political institutions, I think most of us would agree they're not functioning at their optimum capacity. If we look around at the health of our families and neighborhoods and local groups, the seedbeds of all the qualities we need, I think we might say that they are not in the greatest condition that they've ever been in. Pope Francis once said, we had a conference in Rome on the family, basically, and Pope Francis said that the social environments, our social environments, are every bit as endangered and every bit as need of care and attention as our natural environments. That part of his teachings hasn't always been brought forward, but I think it's incredibly important. So I guess my answer to your question would be, it's not the ideals, it's what we do, how we fulfill our responsibility to maintain them.
Thank you.
I think it's important to stress that actually the most famous and eloquent defense of the constitutional order is the recognition of difference. My family, we take our kids to various American sites all over the country. We've been to Monticello, Fort Ticonderoga, Independence Hall. So we went to Montpelier, which is the home of James Madison. And the guide there said something that struck me. He's talking about Madison sitting there writing defense of the Constitution, writing the essays that make up part of the Federalist Papers. And he said, being here in this study, it's like being in the patent office where Einstein wrote his revolutionary papers on physics. In other words, because Madison is arguing something brilliant and ingenious, There were those that were saying this Constitution can't work. Patrick Henry said the Constitution can't work. He says, you're going to have a centralized government? We're too large. This will become an empire. We're going to become Rome. And poor James Madison had to debate Patrick Henry about the ratification of the Constitution. I think I read somewhere that Jefferson, who was in France, wrote to Madison with advice, helpful advice, where he said that the only way to defeat Patrick Henry in debate is to, quote, devoutly pray for his imminent death. But what Madison does, and does brilliantly, is he says, actually, if we're going to create a democracy, we also need to worry about the tyranny of the majority. And so if we create a constitutional system that has both federalism and separation of powers, we actually will simultaneously allow us to have a central government with an identity as a country, while also allowing space for human difference. He may have made that argument with only several million people. That argument holds true with 300 million people. What's important is that at the same time, we also find what unites us. So if Montpelier reminds us that America is founded in recognition of human difference, Madison writes on a Federalist 10, he says, if you think you can remove human difference, he says, built into human nature is differing opinions about religion, about economics, about politics. We are different, and we need to have space to disagree. But then we also need to find what unites us. And there, you have to take your kids to another site. So we took our kids to Gettysburg and speak about what the Civil War was about and what Lincoln taught us at Gettysburg. I said, it's okay if I'm interested. Who here has been to Gettysburg? Raise your hand. Oh, a lot. Okay. You should all go. If you have children, you should take your children. I recommend the Segway tour of Gettysburg. It's a great way of seeing the battlefield, though I did hit a tree branch and I flew off and scraped my entire arm, so now I could say I've been wounded at Gettysburg. The world will little forget what I said there, but it can never forget what I did there. But if you think about what Lincoln is saying there, what we owe our fathers, our founding fathers, and what it means to have what was resolved 7 years ago, and he uses those words because that's the language of the Hebrew Bible. He didn't say, Lincoln in his regular conversation, I'll see you in 80 minutes. He's trying to capture the tenor of the King James Bible, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Our mutual friend, Leon Cass, has noted that Lincoln is deliberately changing the language. Jefferson wrote of equality as a self-evident truth. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Lincoln is speaking about it as a proposition. Proposition is something that one proves. And Lincoln is saying it falls to us to reestablish and reprove by our actions, to reestablish by our actions in every generation the covenantal creed of equality. So if you take Madison and Lincoln in tandem, you have a country that allows for difference, but also has a covenantal creed. And that, I think, at its best, is what America can be, with 3 million people or with 300 million people.
Beautiful.
I'm going to ask the organizers to arrange a brass plaque for you so that you can announce wounded at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
One thing that marks a difference between me and the two of you is that you're experts in the law in different ways. The learned hand professor emerita of law at Harvard, a rabbi is nothing if not an expert in the 1613 divine laws of the Torah. What should we be reminded of about the law? Is the law really something that we should revere? or rather it's something we should make sure we have a good tax lawyer for so that we can avoid it? Why is the law important?
I would say what is important, essential, is the rule of law, which is a shorthand expression for a lot of ideas. The ideas that laws should be publicly promulgated, they should be well established, general, they should be adjudicated impartially, applied equally. It includes concepts like no one being above the law, like cases decided alike, laws should not be applied retroactively. You put all that together in a package, I would say the rule of law is indispensable as a precondition for all the deals that we've been talking about this afternoon. And yet, like the other ideals we've been talking about, rule of law is just words on paper, unless it has effective institutions to back it up and a culture in which at least a significant proportion of the population most of the time is oriented toward the notion of the rule of law. And this brings me to distress at the fact that in the nation's law schools, for many decades now, there has been a significant school of thought that teaches and writes and proclaims that the rule of law is just a story made up to advance, made up by the powerful to advance power, the getting and keeping of power. I think that it has gained a lot of traction, and it's gained a lot of traction in very respectable circles. The Storrs Lectures at Yale Law School, a very prestigious lecture series, were given by a then grand old man of the law. His name was Grant Gilmore, and he gave the whole lecture on why the rule of law is just a fiction and nobody believes in it anymore except, quote, unreconstructed cold warriors. What was the reaction to that talk in academic circles? Nothing new in Grant Gilmore's talk. So I do think that is a matter of great concern, and it brings us back to one of the other topics we were discussing, and that is just because an ideal is frequently violated, just because we don't always live up to that ideal, it's not a reason for getting rid of the ideal. I think Catholics understand that very well. I think thanks to you. You know what I'm going to say, right? Thanks to original sin, we understand that a rule, an ideal, can be frequently violated. We fail to live up to it all the time, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the ideal. There's a talk show host in Boston who has a call-in show, and people call in, and sometimes they say, oh, the Catholic Church, there are too many outdated rules. We ought to change them. And Howie Carr always says, I'm a bad Catholic, but I don't want them dumbed down to my level.
Well, if you want to talk about a host of very old-fashioned rules, you should meet Orthodox Judaism. I think Mary Ann is absolutely right that reverence for the rule of law is important, central, and that comes from institutions and culture. Institutions and culture.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful, let me speak briefly about both. There's a wonderful speech you could find online that the late Justice Antonin Scalia, whose 10th anniversary of his passing we just marked, gave at a hearing, actually, many years after he became a justice, to the Judiciary Committee, I think, about the Constitution. And he said that if you ask people, what's the most important part of the Constitution, the greatest part, they all say the Bill of Rights. And he said, actually, he says, if you've ever looked at the Soviet Union had a much more expansive Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was written, he's quoted in the Bill of Rights of the Soviet Union, that not only would everybody have freedom of speech, but anyone caught suppressing criticism of the government would be called to account. That was in the Bill of Rights of the Soviet Union. But of course, we know it wasn't like that. I think most people here will be too young to remember, but there was a comedian in the 1980s, a Jew who came from Soviet Union to America. His name was Yakov Smirnov. Do you remember Yakov Smirnov?
Yeah.
There are a few people who remember him. All his routines would be like "Vada country," and would always be like the difference between Russia. And he would say something like, "In America, they have many wonderful inventions that they did not have in Russia, like warning shot." Right? Right? So why? So it's exactly as Mary Ann said. What Scalia said is, a Bill of Rights is just that, a parchment promise, if you don't have the institutions to uphold them. And that, of course, is what the Constitution is, the checks and balances to ensure, right, that not too much power is taken by any one faction. And that is part of what ensures the rights of everyone. So that's the institutions. But then, of course, what's also important is the culture. Rabbi Sachs, who I quoted at the beginning, and from which I'm really, if you're interested, his book on really about America from the eyes of a British rabbi, The Home We Built Together, has impacted so much of what I've said today, has also noted that if you study the Exodus story, which so inspired the founding fathers, one of the most interesting things is that Moses, right after he gives them the laws of the Paschal ritual to prepare them for freedom, he doesn't give them first the constitution of the future Israelite polity. That comes later in Exodus, middle of Exodus, and then in Deuteronomy. First thing he does is he talks about what becomes the Passover Seder, how the story will be retold to every generation. And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this God did for me when he took me out of Egypt. The point is, Rabbi Sachs said, is that Moses is saying that as hard as it is to take a people out of freedom, it's maybe even harder to preserve that freedom from generation to generation. That requires a culture that cherishes it and that communicates it to posterity, that teaches your children what it means to be an American. I'll end with this. I mentioned my coffee mug that somebody gave me, the Henry VIII and Six Wives. There's an American parallel. It actually sits on our shelf in our living room or dining room. And we picked it up somewhere. My wife picked it up somewhere. It's unlike the Henry VIII mug. It has words on it. Has the Bill of Rights in it. And when you pour hot coffee into it, the Bill of Rights disappear. It's a disappearing civil liberties mug. It's a metaphor. I wasn't sure if that was clear, so I just wanted to... and it actually serves to us as a reminder. These things can be lost.
Yeah.
They are not a given. And as Mary Ann said, we need both the institutions and the culture necessary to preserve them.
Finally, I think this will have to be brief, your responses, but I want to ask this. St. Paul says to the Christians, here we have no lasting city. That is, the present political arrangement, it's going to fade. Your loyalties ultimately are not to this order. And as I understand it anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, at Passover, the Jews, even if they live in Jerusalem, will pray next year in Jerusalem. That the present arrangement isn't adequate to what we're ultimately made for, because we belong to Him. What does Jewish piety, what does Catholic piety have to say, especially now, to the nation? Or are we just kind of misfits, even if more or less successful misfits? Mary Ann?
Well, I would start, I think, with something that Pope Benedict said when a 16-year-old boy said to him, "What can I, a small person like myself, what can I do to transform the world in a Christian spirit? Because we all know, Catholics, when you're baptized, you receive a missionary vocation. That means that all of us, no matter where we're situated, whatever gifts or talents we have, we're supposed to be doing what we can to transform the world in a Christian spirit. So what Benedict said to this little boy was, you begin with transforming yourself. And when you make yourself into the person that God created you to be, you've transformed part of the world right there. And when other people around you are doing the same thing, you get an oasis. And those oases can expand. And I think, with 2033 coming up, you know what 2033 is? It's the anniversary of the Great Commission, the last thing that Jesus said to his disciples. And that Great Commission is an occasion, I think, for us to think about our baptismal mission, what we need to do to transform this earthly home, and also to take seriously what John Henry Cardinal Newman tried to tell the bishops, and what the bishops got around to emphasizing for us in Vatican II, is it is the laity's responsibility. It is the primary responsibility of the laity, not the primary responsibility of the laity. The laities have the primary responsibility for the transformation of the political, social, and cultural sphere. And I think that is what our tradition teaches us, that whatever we're doing, even a cloistered religious is not just contemplating the universe. He or she is praying for the world. And I think we Catholics need to take that and run with it.
Thank you.
It's true, of course, that the Hebrew Bible speaks of an eschatological era where not only is the temple in Jerusalem restored and nations stream to the mountain of God, but swords are beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. But we are, of course, not in that age. As the joke describes, someone goes to a zoo and sees one cage where there is a wolf lying down with a lamb. And he's astonished, and he says, it is exactly as Isaiah has predicted. The eschatological era is upon us. How have you brought this about? And the zookeeper says, very easy. Every day we put in another lamb. Okay? So in the world in which we are, if you ask me, how does Judaism inform my Americanness? The answer begins first and foremost with gratitude. The very word Jew, of course, is linked to Judea, but its ultimate origin comes from one of the tribes, the fourth son of Leah, who, with her first three children, gives them names linked to her pain that she feels her husband loves Rachel more than her. But finally, with the fourth, she just expresses gratitude to God for the blessing of a child. She says, now I will thank God. And so she names him Yehuda, which means thank God. Which means that to be a Jew, that's where the term comes from, Judah is Yehuda, is to be grateful and to recognize the blessings that we have. And it's impossible in the short time that I have to express what it means given the terrors and persecutions of Jewish exile in its history, what the Jewish people feel they owe America. Antonin Scalia, my friend Chris Scalia, Antonin Scalia's son, told me that one of his father's texts that he loved to quote was George Washington's letter to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island. Not because Antonin Scalia was Jewish, FYI, he was not. but because he thought it was a great American document. Now, if you read Washington's letters, there's actually more than one letter that Washington wrote to the Jews. Because when George Washington was sworn in as president, all the Catholics got together and sent Washington a letter, all the Baptists sent Washington a letter, all the Quakers sent Washington a letter. The Jews in America could not really agree who would send the letter. So they ended up sending Washington 3 letters. There's maybe 1,000 Jews in America, 3 letters. And Washington is a nice man, he responds to each one. So in the first one, the Jews of Savannah, he writes to the Jews in a very open way, and then he ends by saying something like that the God who made his miracles manifest when he took you out of Egypt has made his miracles manifest in the recent revolution. That's America's covenantal identity, in which we all play a part, a biblically inspired covenantal identity. And then he wrote to the Jews of Newport, and he wrote, echoing their words, "It is no longer toleration that is spoken of. For we have a government that gives bigotry no sanction, persecution no assistance." And concluded words that are equally meaningful now. May the children of the stock of Abraham dwell in peace in this land, while each shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. No head of state had written a letter to the Jews like that in their history since the destruction by the Romans of Jerusalem. And he did that, even more strikingly, not in the name of toleration, but in the name of the very covenantal creed to which the country was founded. How can I not be grateful to this country? How can I not be grateful to be an American? And how can I not feel an obligation to communicate that gratitude to my children? The Hebrew word for gratitude, the infinitive, to thank, lehodot, also means in Hebrew the same, means to confess. And the point, as one rabbi said, is true gratitude comes with a confession that I had no right to expect this.
Yeah.
Surely, looking back on Jewish history, I could say as an American that I am grateful because I had no right to expect this gift.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Beautiful.